In the quiet, picture-perfect neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, colorful flower beds, and houses that looked like they'd been plucked straight out of a home decor magazine. It was the kind of place where people waved politely as they drove by, kids played safely in cul-de-sacs, and weekends were spent mowing lawns or hosting backyard barbecues. But beneath its shiny surface, Willow Creek had one quirk that set it apart from other suburban communities: an overly zealous homeowners association, HOA, with a security team that took their job way too seriously. The HOA guards weren't actual police officers. They were private contractors hired to patrol the area and enforce the community's long list of rules. From making sure no one parked on the street overnight to inspecting mailboxes for unauthorized paint colors, these men strutted around the neighborhood like they were guarding Fort Knox instead of rows of cookie-cutter houses. They wore uniforms that didn't quite fit right, carried holstered handguns, and drove golf carts labeled security in bold letters. To some residents, they seemed more like overgrown playground monitors than protectors of peace. But most people shrugged it off, figuring it was just part of living in such a well-kept community. Sarah Thompson had only recently moved back to Willow Creek after spending years serving in the military. A retired Delta Force operator, she had seen things most people couldn't even imagine: chaotic war zones, high-stakes missions, and life-or-death decisions made in the blink of an eye. Now she wanted nothing more than to leave those days behind and focus on caring for her aging parents, who still lived in the same house she grew up in. She also hoped to give her teenage daughter, Emily, a stable environment away from the chaos Sarah had faced abroad. Willow Creek seemed ideal for that. A safe, quiet place where nothing exciting ever happened. Emily, on the other hand, was anything but quiet. At 15, she was full of energy, curiosity, and a healthy dose of teenage rebellion. Unlike her mom, who preferred order and discipline, Emily thrived on spontaneity. She loved riding her bike through the neighborhood, listening to music, and chatting with friends. Her bubbly personality made her popular among her peers, but it sometimes clashed with the rigid expectations of the HOA. Still, Sarah encouraged Emily to enjoy her freedom, reminding her gently to follow the rules whenever possible. One sunny afternoon, Emily decided to take advantage of the beautiful weather by going for a leisurely bike ride. She hopped onto her sleek red bicycle and pedaled down the street, feeling the wind rush past her face. As she rounded the corner near the entrance gate, she noticed two HOA guards standing there, looking unusually serious. One of them pointed at her and said something, but Emily couldn't hear him over the sound of her wheels spinning against the pavement. Thinking nothing of it, she kept riding, unaware that this simple decision would soon lead to a confrontation no one in Willow Creek could have anticipated. What Emily didn't know, and what the guards certainly didn't realize, was that her mother wasn't just another suburban mom trying to keep her family safe. Sarah's calm demeanor and unassuming appearance hid a wealth of experience and skills, honed during years of service in some of the world's toughest environments. And when she heard about what happened at the gate later that day, she knew exactly how to handle the situation, but not before teaching everyone involved a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As Emily pedaled past the entrance gate, she noticed the two HOA guards watching her intently. One of them stepped forward, waving his arms to get her attention. "Hey, you, stop right there," he shouted, his voice sharp and authoritative. Emily slowed down, confused but compliant. She hopped off her bike and looked at the guards, unsure why they were so worked up. "What's going on?" she asked innocently, gripping the handlebars of her bike. The guards exchanged glances before one of them spoke. "You're breaking the rules," he said sternly, pointing at her head. "Where's your helmet? It's mandatory to wear one while riding in this community." Emily blinked, surprised by their tone. "Oh, I didn't know," she replied honestly. "I'll go grab it if you want." But instead of accepting her explanation or giving her a warning, the guard's expression hardened. He stepped closer, his hand resting conspicuously on the holster of his gun. "We don't tolerate rule breakers here," he said coldly. "You need to show some respect." The second guard chimed in, clearly enjoying the power trip. "Yeah, maybe we should teach you a lesson about following the rules," he added with a smirk. To Emily's shock and growing fear, one of them actually drew his weapon, holding it loosely at his side as if to intimidate her. Her heart began racing, but years of hearing her mom's stories about staying calm under pressure kicked in. She froze, not saying another word, while her mind scrambled to figure out what to do next. Unbeknownst to the guards, their dramatic display was quickly drawing attention from nearby neighbors. A few residents peeked out of their windows or stepped onto their porches, curious about the commotion. Someone must have recognized Emily, because within minutes, Sarah Thompson came rushing toward the scene. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with quiet intensity as she assessed the situation. "What's going on here?" Sarah demanded, her voice steady but firm. The guards turned to face her, momentarily distracted by her presence. "Ma'am, your daughter is violating HOA regulations," one of them explained, gesturing vaguely at Emily's bike. "She needs to understand that rules are important." Sarah raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by their attempt to justify pulling a gun on a teenager. "And how exactly does threatening a child with a firearm enforce those rules?" she asked pointedly. The guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to being questioned so directly. One of them tried to brush her off, saying, "We're just doing our job, ma'am. If you don't like it, take it up with the HOA board." But Sarah wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. She glanced at Emily, who looked shaken but unharmed, then back at the guards. "Put the gun away," she instructed calmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, the guard holstered his weapon, though he continued to glare at both Sarah and Emily. For a moment, the tension hung thick in the air, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Sarah knew better than to escalate things further in front of her daughter. Instead, she placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder and gave the guards a tight smile. "We'll discuss this later," she said coolly, her words laced with quiet determination. Then, without waiting for a response, she guided Emily away from the gate and back toward their house. Once they were out of earshot, Emily finally spoke. "Mom, did you see what they did? They pulled a gun on me." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear she'd been trying to hide. Sarah nodded, her jaw tightening as she processed what had happened. "I saw," she replied softly, her protective instincts kicking into high gear. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're going to handle this. But first, I need you to tell me everything that happened." As they walked home, Sarah listened carefully to Emily's account of the encounter, piecing together the details. By the time they reached their front door, she had already begun formulating a plan. The guards might think they were untouchable, but Sarah knew better. Years of training and experience had taught her how to deal with people who abused their power, and she wasn't about to let them get away with intimidating her family. For now, though, she focused on comforting Emily, reminding her that she was safe and loved. But deep down, Sarah couldn't ignore the simmering anger building inside her. Something had to change in Willow Creek, and she was determined to be the one to make it happen. Back at home, Sarah sat with Emily in the living room, her mind racing as she processed the events of the afternoon. Emily was still shaken, clutching a glass of water with both hands as she recounted every detail of the encounter. "They acted like I'd done something terrible, Mom," she said, her voice wavering. "Like not wearing a helmet was some kind of crime." Sarah nodded, her expression calm but her eyes sharp with focus. She reached over and placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," she said gently. "But they crossed a line today, pulling a gun on a child. That's not enforcement, that's intimidation, and it has to stop." As much as Sarah wanted to march back to the gate and confront the guards again, she knew better than to act impulsively. Years of military training had taught her the importance of strategy and timing. Instead, she spent the next hour carefully documenting everything Emily had told her, every word the guards had said, every action they had taken. She even jotted down notes about the reactions of the neighbors who had witnessed the scene. Nothing would be left to chance. Once she felt confident that she had a clear record of the incident, Sarah turned her attention to the HOA itself. She pulled up their website and began reading through their bylaws, searching for any mention of security protocols or rules regarding firearms. To her dismay, she found nothing specific about how the guards were supposed to handle situations like this. It seemed the HOA had given them free rein to enforce the rules however they saw fit, a dangerous oversight that needed addressing. The next morning, Sarah decided to take her concerns directly to the source. She called the HOA office and requested a meeting with the board members and the head of security. When asked why, she simply replied, "I'd like to discuss an issue involving your security team and my daughter." The tone of the receptionist's voice changed immediately, becoming more cautious, but Sarah didn't care. She wasn't looking to start a fight, yet. All she wanted was answers. When the day of the meeting arrived, Sarah dressed casually but deliberately, choosing clothes that made her look approachable yet authoritative. She carried a folder containing her notes and copies of relevant sections from the HOA handbook. As she walked into the conference room where the meeting was being held, she noticed several familiar faces: the HOA president, 2 board members, and the head of security. Also present were the 2 guards involved in the incident, sitting stiffly at the far end of the table. "Thank you for meeting with me," Sarah began, her voice warm but firm. She introduced herself briefly, emphasizing her role as a concerned parent rather than a former soldier. Then she launched into a detailed account of what had happened, laying out the facts without exaggeration or emotion. When she finished, there was a moment of awkward silence as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of the guards finally spoke up, his tone defensive. "We were just doing our job, Mom," he insisted. "Your daughter broke the rules, and we had to make sure she understood the seriousness of it." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. "I understand the importance of rules," she said evenly. "But can you explain to me why drawing a weapon on a teenager is necessary to enforce a helmet policy? Do you think that's proportional?" The room fell silent again. The head of security cleared his throat nervously. "We don't condone excessive force," he muttered, though his lack of eye contact suggested otherwise. Sarah didn't press further, at least not yet. She could see the cracks forming in their confidence, and she knew she had planted the seed of doubt. Before leaving, Sarah handed each board member a copy of her notes, along with a polite but pointed reminder. "If you're going to allow armed guards in this community, you have a responsibility to ensure they're properly trained and accountable. Otherwise, incidents like this will happen again. And I won't be the only one asking questions." As she drove home, Sarah felt a small sense of satisfaction. The HOA might not admit fault outright, but she had made them uncomfortable. And that was a start. What they didn't realize yet was that Sarah wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah sat alone in her kitchen, replaying the meeting in her mind. The HOA board's nervous glances and weak excuses had confirmed what she already suspected. They were more concerned about saving face than addressing the real issue. It was clear that no one on the board fully understood the gravity of what had happened, or perhaps they didn't care. Either way, Sarah knew she couldn't let it slide. Her thoughts drifted back to her years in the military, where discipline, precision, and accountability weren't just ideals but necessities. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent training others, teaching them how to handle high-pressure situations with clarity and control. These so-called guards at Willow Creek wouldn't last 5 minutes in the scenarios she'd faced overseas, and yet here they were carrying weapons and making reckless decisions that could have ended in tragedy. An idea began to form in Sarah's mind, an idea that would not only expose the guards' incompetence, but also force the HOA to take responsibility for their actions. If they wanted to play at being security professionals, then she would show them what true professionalism looked like. By the time Emily joined her in the kitchen for dinner, Sarah had a plan. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily asked cautiously, noticing the determined look on her mother's face. Sarah smiled, softening her expression. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she replied. "But I think it's time we gave these guys a little lesson." The next morning, Sarah sent an email to the HOA president, requesting another meeting. This time, under different terms. "I'd like to propose a training session," she wrote. "As someone with experience in tactical operations and crisis management, I believe I can offer valuable insights into proper security practices. This could benefit both your team and our community." To her surprise, the response came quickly. The HOA agreed, likely eager to appease her after the awkwardness of their previous encounter. They scheduled the session for the following weekend, inviting all security personnel and board members to attend. When the day arrived, Sarah stood in the community center parking lot, dressed in athletic gear and carrying a duffel bag filled with equipment. The guards showed up reluctantly, their usual bravado replaced by wary curiosity. The HOA president introduced Sarah briefly, referring to her as a concerned resident with expertise in safety protocols. No one seemed to realize who or what they were dealing with. Sarah started the session with a simple question. "How many of you have received formal firearms training?" A few hands went up hesitantly, but most stayed down. She nodded knowingly. "Okay, let's start with the basics," she said, her tone calm but commanding. Over the next hour, she led them through a series of drills designed to test their situational awareness, decision-making skills, and ability to de-escalate conflicts. Predictably, the guards struggled. During one exercise, Sarah simulated a scenario where a neighbor accidentally blocked the driveway while unloading groceries. Instead of calmly resolving the issue, one guard immediately reached for his holster, a move that earned him a sharp rebuke from Sarah. "You don't draw your weapon unless lives are in danger," she said firmly. "This is a dispute over parking, not an active threat." By the end of the session, sweat dripped from the guards' foreheads, and their confidence had crumbled. Even the HOA president looked embarrassed, quietly jotting down notes as Sarah wrapped up the training. "Carrying a gun isn't a status symbol," she concluded. "It's a responsibility. If you're going to enforce rules, you need to do it with respect, restraint, and competence." As the group dispersed, Sarah felt a flicker of satisfaction. She hadn't raised her voice or made accusations, but she had delivered a message loud and clear. They were out of their depth. And if they didn't shape up, she wouldn't hesitate to take things further. For now, though, she had planted the seeds of change, and she was ready to watch them grow. The training session left a lasting impression on everyone involved, though not in the way the HOA or its guards might have hoped. As word spread about what had happened during those drills, whispers rippled through Willow Creek estates like a breeze stirring still water. Neighbors who had previously shrugged off the guards' behavior began to question their competence and their presence altogether. Sarah's calm yet authoritative demeanor during the exercises had made it painfully obvious that these men were playing at a job they weren't qualified for. For days after the session, residents approached Sarah with stories of their own encounters with the security team. One woman recounted how a guard had yelled at her for leaving her trash cans out past noon, while another described being followed home because he thought she was suspicious for walking her dog late at night. Each story added fuel to the growing fire of dissatisfaction within the community. People were tired of feeling intimidated, and Sarah's actions had given them the courage to speak up. Meanwhile, the HOA board found itself under increasing pressure. Complaints poured in via emails, phone calls, and even handwritten notes slipped into suggestion boxes. Some demanded better training for the guards, others called for their immediate dismissal. The president of the HOA, a middle-aged man named Richard, tried to downplay the backlash by sending out a vague newsletter praising the recent community safety initiative. But his attempt at spin only angered residents further, as it failed to address the core issue: accountability. Sarah didn't let up. She organized a neighborhood meeting at the community center, inviting all residents to voice their concerns openly. To her surprise, nearly half the households showed up, filling the room with murmurs of frustration and determination. As people shared their experiences, a clear pattern emerged. The guards' aggressive tactics were creating more problems than they solved. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah stood at the front of the room, her posture relaxed but commanding. "I moved here because I wanted a safe place for my family," she began, her voice steady and sincere. "But safety doesn't mean living in fear of the people who are supposed to protect us. We deserve better leadership, better communication, and better standards." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, sparking applause and nods of agreement. Emboldened by the support, Sarah proposed a series of changes: mandatory professional training for all security personnel, stricter oversight by the HOA board, and monthly town hall meetings to ensure transparency. She also suggested forming a resident advisory committee to review policies and provide feedback directly to the board. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from frustration to hope. Residents left feeling empowered, knowing they had finally taken a stand against the unchecked authority of the HOA and its guards. For many, it was the first time they'd felt truly united as a community. Behind the scenes, however, tension simmered. The guards, humiliated by both the training session and the public outcry, grew defensive. They complained to the HOA board, accusing Sarah of undermining their authority and causing division. But their arguments fell flat when confronted with overwhelming evidence of their missteps. Even Richard, who had initially resisted making drastic changes, realized he had no choice but to act, or risk losing the trust of the entire neighborhood. Within weeks, the HOA announced sweeping reforms. The 2 guards involved in Emily's incident were fired, along with several others who refused to undergo additional training. New hires were required to pass rigorous certification programs before being allowed to carry weapons. Additionally, the board agreed to implement Sarah's proposal for regular town hall meetings and the formation of the advisory committee. Though some neighbors quietly grumbled about rocking the boat, most welcomed the changes. Life in Willow Creek began to feel lighter, less suffocating. Children played freely again, parents chatted without glancing over their shoulders, and the once dreaded sight of a golf cart labeled security no longer inspired dread. For Sarah, the victory was bittersweet. She hadn't asked for this fight. It had been thrust upon her, but she was proud of what she'd accomplished. More importantly, she knew Emily could ride her bike without fear now. Still, Sarah couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for the lessons learned to stick. Change, after all, was never permanent unless nurtured. And if anyone dared to forget, Sarah was ready to remind them. The fallout from the HOA's reforms rippled through Willow Creek Estates like a wave, washing away years of simmering resentment and replacing it with cautious optimism. For the first time in recent memory, residents felt heard and respected. The once dreaded security team was now staffed by properly trained professionals who approached their jobs with humility rather than arrogance. Gone were the days of holstered guns being brandished over minor infractions. Instead, the new guards focused on fostering goodwill and building trust within the community. Sarah became an unofficial hero to many, though she never sought the title. Neighbors stopped her at the grocery store or during evening walks to thank her for standing up to the HOA. Some even joked about starting a petition to make her the honorary mayor of Willow Creek. While Sarah laughed off the praise, she knew her actions had sparked something meaningful, a renewed sense of unity among residents who had previously kept to themselves. Emily, too, noticed the shift. At school, classmates whispered about how cool it was that her mom had taken on the HOA. One day, as they sat together at lunch, a friend leaned in conspiratorially and asked, "Is it true your mom used to be some kind of secret agent?" Emily grinned, neither confirming nor denying the rumor. Let them imagine what they wanted. Her mom was pretty amazing. But not everyone was thrilled with the changes. A small faction of residents grumbled that Sarah had caused unnecessary drama, accusing her of stirring up trouble where none existed. They argued that the old system may have been flawed, but at least it kept things predictable. To them, Sarah's intervention represented chaos, a disruption of the status quo they preferred. These complaints reached Sarah indirectly, passed along by sympathetic neighbors eager to warn her. But she didn't let them bother her. She understood that change always came with resistance, especially when people were comfortable, even if their comfort came at the expense of fairness. Instead of engaging directly with her critics, Sarah focused on nurturing the positive momentum she'd helped create. One way she did this was by becoming actively involved in the newly formed Resident Advisory Committee. As one of its founding members, she worked alongside other volunteers to review existing HOA policies and suggest improvements. Together, they tackled issues ranging from parking regulations to landscaping guidelines, ensuring that rules were reasonable and enforced fairly. Their efforts earned widespread approval, further solidifying Sarah's reputation as a problem solver rather than a troublemaker. As summer approached, the neighborhood began to feel more like a community and less like a collection of houses bound by rigid rules. Families gathered for barbecues, kids played tag in the cul-de-sacs, and impromptu block parties popped up every few weeks. During one such gathering, Sarah found herself chatting with Richard, the HOA president, who admitted he'd underestimated her at first. "I thought you were just another angry homeowner," he confessed with a sheepish smile. "But you actually cared enough to make things better." Sarah chuckled, brushing off the compliment. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "Everyone here deserves credit for speaking up and demanding change." Her words reflected the truth. While she had ignited the spark, it was the collective effort of the residents that had fanned it into a flame. Still, Sarah remained vigilant. She knew that progress was fragile and required constant care. When rumors surfaced about the HOA considering cost-cutting measures that might compromise the quality of future training programs, she wasted no time addressing the issue head-on. Armed with data and persuasive arguments, she reminded the board, and herself, that shortcuts could undo everything they'd worked so hard to achieve. By the end of the season, life in Willow Creek had transformed in subtle yet significant ways. People smiled more, complained less, and looked out for one another. And while Sarah hoped to leave her warrior days behind, she couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing she'd made a difference, not just for her family, but for everyone who called Willow Creek home. As autumn settled over Willow Creek estates, painting the trees in hues of gold and crimson, life in the neighborhood felt almost idyllic. The once oppressive presence of the HOA guards had softened into something far more approachable. Residents no longer avoided eye contact with security personnel. Instead, they exchanged friendly waves and greetings during morning jogs or afternoon strolls. It was a subtle but powerful shift, one that reminded everyone how much difference mutual respect could make. For Sarah, this newfound peace allowed her to step back from the spotlight and focus on what mattered most: her family. She spent more time tending to her parents, helping them navigate the challenges of aging, while cherishing the quiet moments they shared around the dinner table. Emily, inspired by her mother's courage and leadership, began volunteering at school events and speaking up in class discussions. Her confidence blossomed, mirroring the same resilience and determination that defined Sarah. But even as Sarah embraced the slower pace of suburban life, she remained watchful. Change, she knew, wasn't permanent unless nurtured. When rumors surfaced about the HOA considering budget cuts that might affect ongoing training programs for the guards, Sarah didn't hesitate to act. Armed with facts and figures, she attended a board meeting to advocate for maintaining high standards. "We've come so far," she told the board members earnestly. "Let's not take a step backward now." Her words resonated, and the proposed cuts were scrapped. The incident served as a reminder that progress required vigilance, and that Sarah's voice still carried weight within the community. Though some neighbors teased her about being the unofficial watchdog of Willow Creek, there was no malice in their jokes. They respected her dedication and trusted her to keep things on track. The transformation in the neighborhood extended beyond policies and procedures. It touched hearts. Neighbors who had once been strangers became friends, bonding over shared experiences and common goals. Block parties turned into annual traditions, and community gardens sprouted where empty lots had once stood. Even Richard, the HOA president, seemed lighter these days, often joining in conversations at the park or lending a hand during community cleanup days. One crisp Saturday morning, as Sarah sipped coffee on her porch, she watched Emily race down the street on her bike, her laughter echoing through the air. For a moment, Sarah felt a pang of nostalgia, not for her days in the military, but for the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the confrontation at the gate, the tense meetings with the HOA, and the countless hours spent advocating for change. None of it had been easy, but every challenge had been worth it. Later that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah joined her neighbors for a potluck dinner in the community center. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, and the room buzzed with laughter and conversation. Someone raised a glass to toast the season, but before they could speak, another neighbor chimed in. "Let's toast to Sarah," he said, his voice warm with gratitude. Without her, none of this would have happened. Sarah blushed, shaking her head modestly. "This isn't about me," she insisted. "It's about all of us working together." But as glasses clinked and cheers filled the air, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This was what she'd fought for, a place where people cared for one another, where rules existed to serve rather than control, and where families like hers could thrive. That night, as Sarah tucked Emily into bed, her daughter looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, do you think anyone will ever mess with us again?" she asked sleepily. Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "Probably," she admitted. "But if they do, we'll handle it together." In Willow Creek Estates, peace had been restored, but everyone now understood that crossing the Thompsons came with consequences. And though Sarah hoped to leave battles behind, she knew one thing for certain. When it came to protecting her family and her community, she would always stand ready.